Hello, hello. It is the Week 14 weekly matchup graphs, quarterback, running back, receiver. I got a new mic, so hopefully it sounds good. I think it does. Better than it was the last 2 days on TikTok, better than it was on my old mic in general, for sure. So starting with quarterback today, there is a lot on this left side. A bunch of the guys that either are not good or on bye are the ones that have the good matchups, or the ones actually playing is having the bad matchups. So starting over in this bottom right, actually, Will Levis has 16 points in 4 straight. Quietly, he's been a quarterback 2 4 straight weeks in a row if you're playing super flex leagues. And then this week, he gets Jacksonville. Jacksonville, 5.5 extra passing fantasy points per game over the average. So if we're saying he's getting that 16 points per game this month, you would expect something closer to 21 or 22. Not that that's going to happen, but definitely has the matchup for that ceiling to have that great shot at a 20 plus. Jacksonville is also last in explosive pass plays. I'll talk about that a little bit more with Calvin Ridley, but Levis, obviously, a downfield thrower, especially in this passing attack. Herbert in this middle right here, a little bit in the green, and versus Kansas City, the last two, he hasn't done well. Under 13 points in each of the last 2 games. But before that, the first 6 games of his career against Kansas City, we all know how this game usually goes. He had 20 points in every single one of those first 6. And we look at these last 5 games for Kansas City, they've been below average against the pass. They're 22nd in these last 5 games. The big thing right here is, one, it's a Sunday night football game, so we'll have to wait a little bit longer, but it's very Lad McConkey dependent. Kansas City's defense, their strength is on the outside in terms of their corners. They are pretty bad against the slot, and that's where Lad's going to be 75% of the time. Chargers don't really have much weapons, so if your main weapon with the best matchup by far is going to be out, that's the big factor for him. If he's in, I do like Herbert a lot this week. Kyler, right by him. He played Seattle 2 weeks ago, and I went on a rant about how everything is average for them. Him and Marv, it's basically as average a matchup as you can get. Said he basically gets points per game. He only had 11 points, but that's because he had 0 touchdowns. He had 300 yards, so it was actually a decent NFL game. Not amazing, obviously, he didn't score a touchdown, but 300 yards. So I'd expect something similar, kind of right in the middle of his average. Nothing too crazy there. Tua over on this left side, coverage-wise, he actually matches up really well here. It is bottom 10 passing for this month in terms of the Jets defense. Obviously, we think of the Jets, we think of a really good defense, especially in the secondary. Sauce, most likely not going to play, injured. So that's the big thing, obviously, especially when you got Tyreek Hill out there. But they just haven't been good as of late against this passing defense, at least when we're comparing it to the Jets. Usually, they are at home, obviously, too. So instead of playing up in New York in the cold, they're going to be at home in Miami. Helps them a lot more there. And then Jameis over here up in this top left as well. First versus quarterbacks is Pittsburgh. But that's because they're number 1 against the rushing quarterbacks. That doesn't really matter for Jameis. They're still good against the pass. They're top 5, but they're not close to number 1 there. And it is very boom bust. He played Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago, I think, had 14 points. And we look at the 5 starts for Jameis. He has had 2 under 15 points. The other 3 games, though, he's had over 25 in the other 3. And we look at the passing attempts for Pittsburgh, or for Jameis. Against Pittsburgh, he had 27 passing attempts. The other 4 games, 41, 46, 46, 58. So you'd expect him to pass more than 27 times. Maybe not in the 40s, but still over 26. More than that median should do him a lot better than just the 14 points that he had against Pittsburgh last time. And Joey Porter's been struggling. I'll talk about that with Jeudy later as well. But it's not a horrible matchup, especially with what Jameis has been doing lately. It's hard not to be playing him in Superflex leagues, and he's definitely startable in 1 quarterback leagues as well. On to running back next. We got Tony Pollard in this top right. So really good running backs. Like Barkley gets Carolina this week. That's going to help his MVP case if he goes for 200 yards against them, which is pretty likely to happen. Kamara up there as well. Williams, Pollard in this top right. Again, like Levis, against Jacksonville. Jacksonville is actually not bad against the ground. The reason that they're all the way on this right is because they're horrible against receiving running backs. So Pollard in 6 of his last 7 games, 4+ targets. Spears is back now. About half of those games he wasn't there, so that might affect it a little bit. But still, his receiving is obviously one of his strengths. more middle of the ground against the rushing, but also better touchdown upside compared to the usual Titans offense when they're going against Jacksonville here. Guerendo in this bottom right, he's projected for about 15 carries. The big thing here, they are home favorites, which is big for running backs specifically, against this Bears defense, which they don't really have the greatest defensive line. They are second to last in terms of adjusted yards before contact, and that definitely helps in terms of Guerendo, their San Francisco offense, because one of their weaknesses has been this rushing offensive line. They are near the bottom, so having kind of bad against bad makes it more equal, especially when a lot of his work could come on the ground. Good matchup overall for Guerendo. He's going to get the volume. They don't really have another guy. They have a Abanikanda, which I used to love coming out of the draft. Missed, but he's their second option now, and he just got to San Francisco yesterday. So Guerendo should be getting 90+% of those snaps. Irving right next to him. Here on out, he's a must start, obviously. He's got 100+ yards in each of his last 3 wins. The reason I say the last 3 wins is because they play the Raiders. Tampa Bay's under 500, or maybe 500 exactly, but Raiders, obviously, they're going to be favored. And he is 4th in explosive run percentage, a stat that I love. And one of those things, who is above him? Saquon, pretty good. Derrick Henry, good. Jahmyr Gibbs. And then Bucky Irving. Huge ceiling, pretty great floor, especially in this matchup where you should see more volume. So really like him just going forward this week, everything. I think he's got Carolina next week in terms of the playoffs. Overall, great. Tracy Jr. also in this bottom right. New Orleans, it's a good game script. The Giants, they've lost like 15 games in a row. It's something horrible. But they're a bad rushing defense in general. He's only got 9 carries in each of the last 2 games since they benched Daniel Jones. So that's the problem. But in a game script where maybe a little bit more rushing, maybe a little bit better in terms of just overall matchup, Daniel Jones has been out hurting him, but it's not like it's a huge problem in terms of quarterback play. It's always been bad. They just need to have a better game script overall. Braelon Allen up here. It's Breece Hall right now. From what I've seen so far, don't know if Breece Hall's going to play, which sucks. Hate it. But Braelon Allen basically becomes a must start. If I did rankings, he would be in my top 12 this week, I think. And mainly just because volume is king. So right now, Breece Hall has the 9th best volume. Braelon Allen has like the 50th among running backs. But if you add them together, it would be overall RB1. He's basically getting 100% of the RB2 work. So is he going to get 100% of the touches like Chase Brown did when Zach Moss is out? Maybe not. But it's probably going to be close. And the receiving is there too. He's a true 3-down back. So without Breece Hall there, the volume basically makes him an RB1 anyways. And he is talented. I do really like him as a player. Tons of upside. Overall, I think he is basically a must start, especially when the matchup is pretty solid. DeAndre Swift, dead center right here. He has been sub 10 fantasy points in 3 of those last 4 games. That's not the great. And he's basically the opposite of Guerendo here. Road underdogs. Ever since the new OC came in, the touches have been down. It's not horribly down, but it is down, and he's not getting goal line work. So a lot of it does just depend on, does he get the receiving? That's how it is a lot of the times for Swift. Don't love it. Don't love it. Don't love it. Aaron Jones, close to that same spot. Versus Atlanta, they're 7th best against the run, and similar over the last, or one game in the last 12, or last 6, sorry. One game in the last 6, he's had 12 points. One time. A lot of touchdowns recently, and it hasn't really helped him. Maybe like 2 games in a row with touchdown at least. Hasn't helped him a ton. So not the greatest spot, but playable, just not ideal. Maybe more of a flex play for this week. Pacheco, there's been lots to talk about him. He is in the red here, but the Chargers honestly are closer to the exact average when we're looking at the actual compared to other teams, a little bit lower, but closer to like 16th overall. And it just depends on the volume. So we look at last week, he got exactly 50% of the work in terms of the carries. Targets I would eventually expect to be about the same. I think he's worth of a start because Mahomes had a season high in attempts last week. So that's why he only got 8 touches. But in a week that it's not really going to be a season high in attempts you would expect from Mahomes, and a second week back, I would expect closer to 15 touches for this week. Kareem Hunt sucks. I know he's been good in fantasy. You can be bad in the NFL and be good in fantasy. He's not very good. Pacheco's solid. So I think he gets the volume, around 15 touches. Really good defense overall, but still worthy of a start, I think. Dowdle, he plays the Bengals, and usually you would think that's perfect. It's not bad. There's definitely a lot of positives. I will say the Bengals are 9th against running backs. You wouldn't expect it because they're freaking horrible, but they're not horrible against running backs. They're horrible against the pass. The thing is, they're allowing a bunch of points. They've been out allowing about 35 points per game this month. Their best linebacker is now out for the season. It just kind of depends on what the Cowboys do. They're not going to be passing a ton, I wouldn't expect, with Cooper Rush, especially in this matchup. But usually the Bengals are scoring a lot. The other team is also passing a bunch because they can and get a lot of explosive plays. So, Dowdle, overall, I think a great start, but he doesn't compare to, say, a CeeDee Lamb. And finishing it off with receivers, as always, starting over in this top right, we got the red guys, meaning they are shadowed. Drake London is the bigger one or Drake London and Terrell. A.J. Brown, it doesn't really matter. He's shadowed by J.C. Horn, who hasn't really been that great this year. Kind of the same as the other Carolina corners in terms of fantasy points per route. London, though, has Stephon Gilmore. It's not the greatest in terms of everybody else because, as you see, Minnesota is 31st. So Stephon Gilmore a little better than 31st, which makes Mooney a little bit better in terms of the matchup, but it's not anything to be scared of is what I'm saying. Jefferson has A.J. Terrell. So again, bumps up Addison, in my opinion, the other side of that matchup. Jefferson, nothing again to be not starting him. Obviously, you start Jefferson every single week, but A.J. Terrell is a really good corner overall. So a slight downgrade, especially when you're looking at it where it's like, oh, Jefferson has the 28th defense this week, and it's more like in the middle, I would say. Ridley is the one that is the most interesting to me because, as I mentioned earlier, Jacksonville last in the NFL in explosive pass plays allowed. Ridley, 1, great versus man coverage. Jacksonville number 2 in the NFL to just the Detroit Lions. And 2, first in the NFL in air yards. So what does that mean? Massive blowout potential. The volume should be there. It kind of just depends on, does Levis hit him deep? I think the opportunities will be there. Does he get that accurate ball down the sideline, accurate ball in the middle, that he has that big-time play? Because he's going to get the air yards. He's going to have the matchup. Does he convert on those big plays? I think there's a very, very high chance that he has one of those big games this week. I think he's worth a play, obviously, saying that. So McConkey, like I talked earlier, the numbers, Kansas City is 30th versus the slot. They are second best against the outside receivers. These last 3 games, he has the 9th best target share. Even with him being injured, if he plays, I still think I'm playing him. And JSN, similar, slot guy. Arizona, they're 26th versus the slot, number 6 against the outside guys. Arizona has dominated DK Metcalf in his career. So as we see the massive difference, JSN over here, DK Metcalf over here. And we look at them playing 2 weeks ago. Again, JSN, not a ton of targets, but 7 targets, 6 receptions, 77 and a touchdown. DK, only 5 targets, 4 and 59. And we look just back throughout his entire career. DK has been pretty bad against the Cardinals. I know only the last 2 matchups have been against Gannon's defense. Before that, completely different coaching staff. But for some reason, he's just consistently at his worst against the Arizona Cardinals. Pickens over here, similar to Calvin Ridley. Pickens, 3rd most explosive pass plays allowed by the Cleveland Browns. Surprising for their secondary. But again, Pickens, top 5 in air yards, especially with Russell Wilson there. Overall, an extremely high ceiling. Yes, a little bit lower floor, but still should be completely fine there. Myers, the volume has been pretty unbeatable. So I know right now he's sitting at about 17th or 18th in projected volume. The last month, he has been top 5. And we look at last week, who killed Tampa Bay? Adam Thielen. Similar roles. He is not as much of a pure slot guy as he used to be with Devontae Adams there. Only about 40% in the slot, 60% on the outside and kind of moving around. But overall, a pretty good matchup here against Tampa Bay. Marvin Harrison Jr. again, Seattle, the exact same kind of average against everybody, but he did not do well against them last time. So last week was the first game in the last since week 4. Since week 4, his first game with over 7 targets. Again, 2 weeks ago, only had 6 targets against Seattle, 3 catches for 47 yards, and that was on 37 attempts. So it's not like it was a low passing volume day. Trey McBride got a ton of work. Marvin did not. I would expect them after last week to keep targeting Marv closer to that 9, 8, 10 target range. Hopefully, doesn't make it easy. Still that boom bust guy for sure. Jeudy, like I talked about, same thing. A lot of these guys have the same thing this week. He is third in air yards with Jameis. Pittsburgh is good against receivers. However, Joey Porter last week and the week before that has not really been good. Jeudy was solid 2 weeks ago against Pittsburgh, and then Porter Jr., after struggling those couple weeks, went against the Bengals, shadowed T. Higgins. They kind of bracketed Jamar Chase, double teamed him a lot, and just put Porter on an island with T. Higgins. He was flagged 5 times. 5 times. So for fantasy, that kind of sucks. Like, T. Higgins probably should have had a way better day. He still scored like 20 points, I think, which is why I think Jeudy does well, is because Higgins had like 20. It's a very similar offense right now, at least, to the Browns and Bengals. And then Porter has just been struggling. He is flag happy, but that's because he's going to beat a lot. So hopefully Jeudy on those big plays, a lot of those downfield throws, has a lot of potential there. And then the Jets, very last year, it's pretty depressing. Adams, Wilson, on top of each other. Adams now projected for a better volume after these last few weeks with how Wilson's been getting the treatment from Rodgers. And looking at Rodgers, he's last in yards per attempt among the veteran quarterbacks. Like, the only guys that are worse are like Anthony Richardson, Bryce Young, maybe Drake May. It's not good. The volume is great, but it's not that accurate, and it's not very downfield. Like, the only time they're getting accurate balls is within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. So the thing is with them, a lot of it is yards after catch based, which Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, yes, they can do it, but that's not their specialty. And then it's red zone based. So it's one of those things where, are they getting a lot of red zone trips against this Miami defense? That's TBD. They're strong against the outside. They're playable, but it's tough. It just severely caps their ceiling, is what I'm saying. Very touchdown dependent guys. Last week, Adams worked. He scored a touchdown. Wilson didn't work. Got missed on a touchdown, and it was 0. So that's kind of how it's going to be, I think, the rest of the way out. Thank you guys for watching. Almost playoffs. Hopefully, this helps you guys get in this week. I've got the bye in my main league, so I'm pretty happy. We're 2 games away from winning it all in my high school friend group, so love that. See you guys soon.